Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Food Origins Podcast. I figured I'd give you a kind of real time video intro for this episode. But before I do that, let me remind you guys the podcast is sponsored by Firecracker Farm. That's Alex and his family growing hot peppers in Florida. And they make this awesome, super cool push grinder where he puts the hot pepper infused salt in there. This one is his new one, Snake Eater. You can catch it before they sell out at firecracker.farm. And also, he's also got Big Daddy right here with all the infused salt. You can see all the color from all the different salt, how the hot peppers infuse there. Really awesome stuff. This one's the brick. These might be sold out, but catch them when they're on the website. And then you can also get different flavors, Pineapple Express, Apocalypto, and their regular Three Kings, which is the Ghost Pepper, Trinidad, and the Carolina Reaper. Hope you guys have a good one. This episode has got Derek Wilson from Crosso Meats. Been a couple years coming along, getting this one done, and appreciate him. We got to do the episode remotely, but then on the road, I was on the road last week and was able to visit the farm and in Idaho. It's in Pollock, Idaho, just outside of Riggins, if you guys don't know where that is, and really got to spend some time with him. So there'll be some extra content videos coming out, and I'll be putting those out on Instagram. But enjoy the episode. You hear his awesome story of resilience and taking back his family's farm. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for listening. Boom, there we go. All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Food Origins Podcast. My guest today, I have the honor of having Derek Wilson. He is the fifth generation rancher at Crosso Ranch and the owner of Crosso Meats. Derek, it's been a long time coming. I know we've been chatting back and forth. Probably 2 years is probably how long we know each other. Shout out to our mutual friend Ryan for connecting us. And the floor is yours. Tell us where you're from, man, and appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, definitely excited to be here. So I live in a town where basically no one has ever heard of, outside of a town called Riggins, Idaho. Town of about 400 people, and we're 12 miles outside of that. So if that gives you any idea how remote we are. But yeah, I was born and raised here, left, kind of pursuing the dreams of a small town kid, right? Like go make all the money, go do all that stuff. And then ended up, oddly enough, right back here at our ranch that was homesteaded back in 1890, and fifth generation here. My kids are the sixth generation here. So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind, crazy story. Never thought, honestly, I would be back here when I was younger, but yeah, definitely feel very blessed to be where we are and kind of being able to live how we live.
Yeah, and of course, I want to go through that whole journey with you. But the easiest way to start is like, what was it like growing up, and what'd you eat growing up?
Yeah, so obviously grew up on a ranch, and we were not wealthy, would probably be the understatement of the day. And so, yeah, I mean, growing up eating, it was basically like whatever, right? Obviously we would have beef, from the ranch, a lot of wild game because like, that's what you're out hunting. And then, the delicacies of ramen and all that type of stuff too, that you would get when you don't come from a super wealthy family. So a little bit of everything. But I will tell you, like, just around food, as I got older, my mom used to waitress at a restaurant, just south of here, about an hour drive, a really, really nice place, actually a place called Shore Lodge. Really good food, pretty high end. And I remember her telling me that she wanted me to work there at this restaurant. And I was like, okay, it's better than bucking hay bales or, some of this other stuff. And she told me that she wanted me to work there because she was like, I may never be able to afford to take you to a restaurant like this, but if you work there when you get older, you'll at least know how to eat at a place like this. And fair enough. It was like I learned what a salad fork is, and like what a white wine
Mm-hmm.
glass is versus a red wine glass, and like all
Yeah.
of those types of things. So I think I worked there like 2 summers, maybe it was 3, but I was bussing tables, and you'd make like 40, $50 a night in tips bussing tables. And so it was really cool because like going down the food route is, you would see all this just amazing food. And of course, like I didn't have any money to eat any of the good stuff. The employee menu was like, a chicken sandwich or something. But it would always be like, man, that French onion soup smells so good. When I have money one of these days, I'm going to have like a French onion soup. And so it is kind of funny because even my wife will give me grief sometimes now, to where like if we go to a nice restaurant and they offer like a French onion soup, I'm probably going to get it because it just always smelled so good coming out of the kitchen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty cool being able to at least be around, some of the higher level of food, let's put it, because what we were eating at home wasn't quite that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, that gives you that kind of like pleasure of knowing that, like, yeah, I saw that for years. Now I want it. Now I can have it.
Yeah.
And just tasting it is kind of that satisfaction, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, it was really good getting a chance to be around it, and seeing people that would come in and spend $1,000 for dinner, and just like it wasn't even a big deal, right? And
Yeah.
for, again, a small town kid living, that grew up on a ranch, lived like lower middle class probably, um, when you would see people do that, you're just like, oh my gosh, like there's people who can afford to do that type of stuff. That's crazy. I wonder what they do. I wonder, and that was like always my question in my head, is like, who are the people that are doing this? Like, what do they do for a living? They're probably not doing the things that I'm doing, as a young kid. And so it was actually a really good, like, kind of mindset lesson as well, to learn some of those things.
Yeah, and I think it's like, um, growing up in the city, I grew up in San Francisco, so it's like kind of reverse. So it's like now it's like I like the outdoors or the quieter area. So it's like, and you ended up doing both. But why don't you take us through a little bit of history, because your ranch has a ton of history. It goes back to 1890. So kind of give us a background on that, and then kind of carry us through, kind of where it led you to, I know you were out in the Bay Area, and then you ended up coming back. So tell us how all that kind of played out.
All right.
But
So
give us
I'll
the
try,
history of the ranch. Yeah.
I'll give you the condensed version, because this, we'd be here all day.
Sure. Sure.
But yeah, so originally the Crosso Ranch was homesteaded back in 1890. And so this is where you would get kind of your 120 acres, you'd stake your claim on the land. In fact, it was initially in 1888 where it was, I guess it would have been my great great grandpa, guy by the name of Otis Gotzinger, German as it gets. And he came out here from Germany, kind of put his stake in the ground here. 1888, took a couple of years to get the paperwork done, officially settled it in 1890. And after that, it passed down to his son, and then it basically skipped a generation and then went to my dad and my dad's brother. And, kind of like throughout all of that, it's got all the twists and turns, right? And again, this is where it could get super long, but I'll keep it expedited, which was, when I was growing up, being a rancher wasn't cool. Like, and I'm glad to see that it kind of has gained a little bit more nostalgia, it seems like, and people maybe respect it a little bit more now. But like even just 30 years ago when I was a kid, it wasn't that you were embarrassed to be, a ranch kid or a farm kid, but it definitely wasn't cool, because really all that meant is that you were broke and your family was broke for the most part. Now we all see these big ranches and luxuries and stuff, but that's like 5% of ranches that are out there, right? Like most ranches, most of the people that I know still to this day that are in the ranching industry, they don't have two nickels to rub together, right? Everything they're doing is, through bank loans and operating loans and cattle loans and all of this stuff. And so again, kind of growing up, I never wanted to do that. Like I would see my dad, and people kind of laugh at it, but I legitimately think the most money the ranch ever gave my dad in a year was probably like 12 to 15 grand. And yes, like he would have, a ranch pickup, which usually wasn't very great, and maybe some utilities paid for and stuff, but there was no money there. And so as I grew up, I first of all, I would say I took for granted just kind of the land and all of that stuff, because it doesn't matter if you have a whole bunch of land. If you feel like you're dirt poor, it's like, cool, I can go hunt or I can go out in the, in the mountains or whatever. But like, we can't afford to go on a vacation. We can't afford to, go out to a nice dinner or any of that. And so like, I always knew like, okay, yeah, I'm the fifth generation, but I had cousins and stuff, and you never know how all that's going to shake out. And kind of long story short, my dad and my uncle ended up kind of getting into a little bit of a spat. They split off what was left of the ranch probably 15 years ago. And so that was where my dad kind of had, roughly about 3,000 acres now. And, he would kind of have the conversation of, what would happen when he got too old to do it, or, maybe when he died. And it was always one of those things where it's like, that's awesome, Dad, but I don't want to do it. Like at that time I was working, and when the conversations really started, I would say when he got into his early 60s. And because he would say like, we would love to have you and your family come, me and my wife and kids, we have 4 kids. It's like, we'd love to have you guys here. And my stepmom at the time would say the same thing, but it's like, there's no money to pay you. So, if you want a chunk of land, you want to come live here, great, but there's no money. Right. And so that was always to me to where it was like, I don't want it. Right. Like, sell it if you want to, go retire. You've worked your ass off for your entire life. Like, go enjoy the last however many years of your life. And that was kind of where it was at until, it's almost been 8 years now, December 15th of 2016. I got the call that really no one ever wants to get, which was my dad had had a massive heart attack and didn't make it. And so at that point, like there had again been kind of just some conversations, but me and my wife, we love to come up and ride the horses and do the cowboy stuff. But I was working at a software company making a lot of money, and I really liked that as well. And so it was kind of like, when we could do both of those things, that was awesome, right? Like I do the, work for the software company during the week, come up here sometimes on the weekends, go hunt, go do all this stuff, whatever. But then when he died, it was like, okay, what we were doing won't work anymore. And so we were kind of like faced with this decision of, do we sell the ranch that's been in our family since 1890, or do we try to keep going? And keep going, didn't really know what that would look like. I wasn't up here to run cows and do all this stuff. I mean, when you have 3,000 acres, it's basically, in and of itself, just a full-time job. And so we were just kind of like up in the air, didn't know what to do. And then my stepmom at the time, she decided that she wanted out. She wanted to sell, leave it, blah, blah, blah. And so at that point, it was like, it got real about selling the ranch. Again, the place that I never planned on being here, never planned on taking over. But it got really real when she was like, yeah, I'm going to sell it. And it was like, okay, my dad didn't have a will. We couldn't stop her from selling it, kind of all of that. And so long story short there as well, because this could be a whole other thing, but we ended up basically taking a year, a ton of lawyer fees, ended up having to buy her out. My sister, who's, I guess what you would say, like a minority owner in the ranch. I was able to buy out my stepmom, kind of get her out of the picture. So it's like, okay, great. And we had to go through like a hard money loan because my stepmom said she wanted the money in 2 weeks. And it was like this crazy deal, but it was like, okay, now we have the ranch, right? We don't know what the hell we're going to do with it. We're living 3 hours away at this point. What are we going to do with the ranch? We have it. And then it was like, oh, the ranch comes with a lot of bills and a lot of overhead and a lot of work and a lot of, animals and all this type of stuff. And so what I was doing at that point now was basically I was back at the ranch like every single weekend. So I was working all these hours, during the week, making good money. But then every weekend, instead of being at home, playing with my kids, whatever, I was back up here building fence or, just whatever, spraying weeds, just all the stuff that you have to do. And it got to the point to where it's like, okay, now what are we going to do? We can either sell it. And my stepmom was just like so ready to sell. It's like we could sell the ranch, make a bunch of money, probably not really have to worry about a lot of bills for a long time at least. Or crazy idea, we could move back. And my wife was like, yeah, I don't know about that at first, right? Because like a little context behind this, about a year before that, we had just bought what we consider to be our forever home, right? Our dream home. It was beautiful on 7 acres right outside of Boise, in a little suburb out there. had our horses there. We could still kind of do the country thing, but yet commute into work. And um, it was like, do we really want to walk away from like what we just bought being our dream home, right? Like, I mean, we had the double-sided showers and stuff, right? Like that was like always something that was going to be so awesome. And she kind of bought into it and was like, you know what? Like, yeah, we'll give it a try, which I still commend her to this day, because I don't know a lot of women who would have been like, yeah, let's uproot. We had at that time brand new twins. They were less than a year old. Let's uproot our house, sell our dream house, sell the house we thought we'd be at forever, and let's go live in a little teeny tiny town to where there isn't even a fast food restaurant within an hour of it, right? And so it's like, yeah, let's do that. And she did, and she was a trooper. And so, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell. Like there's a lot of different paths we could take off of that. But in a nutshell, that's kind of like all the way back from my great great grandpa settling it to what ended up happening. And the funny thing is about this ranch is that my dad, last thing, is that he was kind of like I was as a kid, it sounds like, to where you grow up on a ranch and you just don't think it's that cool because it's a lot of hard work and a lot of bad days, whatever. And so he was going to go be a veterinarian because he was like, I can still kind of be in the ag world, be in the animal world, but yet I don't have to be a dirt poor rancher. And he ended up going and was trying to get his veterinarian degree. And then my great grandpa at the time was just getting old enough to where he needed more help on the ranch. And so my dad actually ended up, kind of despite what his plans were, coming back to the ranch, taking over at that point, and then kind of a similar story, I guess, to me in a sense. And so, yeah, it's some type of boomerang effect this place seems to have on you.
Yeah, man. I mean, quite the journey and quite the turnaround. I mean, willing to put yourself out there kind of unknowingly because you're like, oh, I got to come back and like take over and handle this land that I really haven't worked in a long time, right?
Yeah.
So that's a testament to like, taking care of your family and figuring things out. And that's that's a really difficult task. What's cool is that, you guys started it. That was back in 2016, right?
So in 16 was when my dad died. We officially bought my stepmom out in 2017. So it was actually just under a year from the time my dad had passed away until we had to buy her out. And then it was about another 8 or 9 months after that when we actually moved back. So
So
yeah, it
moving
was.
back and having the land, and now you're like, what? What are we gonna do? Like, what were your thoughts, and what was going through your head, and how'd you guys figure out that you were gonna start a cattle ranch at that point?
So it was the craziest thing, because when we decided to move back, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, if we move back and this doesn't work, at least we could say we tried. If we don't move back and we don't really try to hold on to the ranch and try to hold on to the land, I don't know that I would ever have been able to forgive myself. And it's like one of those things, not to go all like super philosophical, but I believe that if we're lucky, we'll be laying in our bed someday before we pass, and we'll kind of have that opportunity to look back over our life. And the one thing that I don't want to have is regrets. And maybe we will about certain things. I don't know, but I know, and this is kind of where it came back to at that point, is had we not moved back and tried to quote unquote save the ranch, if you want to put it that way, that someday, hopefully way down the road when I'm laying in my deathbed, I would be pissed that I didn't at least try. And and so that's kind of what the decision came down to, is like, if we move back and let's say we can't make it. I mean, there's no jobs here, right? It's a tiny town. If you want to bartend or work at the grocery store or the school or something, you might be able to make like 30 grand a year. Like it's a very, very, just a small town. There's not a lot of money here. And so it's like, if we move back, like we have to start figuring out some different ways that we can make this work. And it's like, okay, I can do, consulting. I was in the world of sales when I was in the software side of it. And it's like, worst case scenario, we can probably do something, I can do something remote. So it was like, okay, I think we can maybe make that work. But then when we got back here, it's like, we have all this land, what are we going to do to make it work for us? Well, it's always been for the most part a cattle ranch, and it still was. But the problem is that my stepmom actually sold all of my dad's cows prior to us buying the ranch. So when we got back here, there was like 7 cows. And those were basically the ones that were out on the mountains that no one could find. And then they ended up coming down later. And so we had to start brand new from scratch. So it's like, okay, after we just spent tons and tons of money to buy my stepmom out, we don't now have, another $500,000 to go and buy a new herd of cows right now. So what are we going to do? So what we ended up doing is partnering with some people that literally now are like family. Some of our best friends, the best people you'll ever meet. And so we kind of made the cow thing start by doing that. And we've been able to slowly grow our herd back that way. It's like we flattened out a piece of land and made an RV parking storage lot. Right. And so it was like literally just kind of scratch and claw your way to do whatever you can to make some money. And then, we started talking about this whole direct to consumer meat business. And, you see some people do it and wonder if there's any money in it. And we're like, you know what? Maybe we should give that a shot. Because I'll never forget, the way that the cattle industry works and kind of how it maybe impacts people on the food side is what most ranchers do is they raise up their yearling calves. And then in the fall, if you do calving the way that we do, in the fall, they come and they buy them all from you. So they hand you a check, maybe that's 50 grand, maybe it's 150 grand, whatever that is. And that's basically your only payday you get of the year when you're in the ranching industry is when you sell all your calves off. And so it was the cattle buyer would always come here because of how our ranch is, the water, the feed, the terrain, and all of that. I'll never forget the guy's name's Ernie Robinson, who was always the cattle buyer. Old guy now, but great guy. But he'd always show up and, oh, damn, Dave. Dave is my dad's name also. He'd show up every year. Oh, damn, Dave, these are some great looking calves. And then he'd write him the check and it would be just for market price. So if that year, calves were going for, $1.25 a pound, that's what you got. They were going for $2.50 a pound, that's what you got. Really, what I realized is you could have the best looking calves, like Ernie would always say, Dave, these are the best looking calves I've seen anywhere, that we bought this year. And then he'd write him a check for $1.25 a pound. And me, like kind of coming from the business world that I was in at that point, I was like, this stuff don't make sense, man. Like, how is it that you can have the best looking calves and get paid the same price basically, and there might be a few cent different here or there, but basically get the same price as maybe the guy down the road who's got these nappy ass looking horrible cattle. Right. And it was just like, yeah. I didn't understand it. It was like, I come from like the entrepreneurial world where like the better you do, the more you make, the more value you do, the more you make. And I was like, but it's not like this in the cattle world. Why is that? It's like, oh, it's all basically price fixed. There's 4 big beef packers that, have big influence setting the prices and whole other story there. But I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And so it was like, well, what if, we already know that our ranch is able to build, in my opinion, at least, some of the best beef that you'll find anywhere. Because again, there's thousands of natural springs where we run our cattle. In the summertime, they're up at like 8,000 feet elevation. So it's not too hot. It's like a cattle paradise. And so these calves come in every year just looking amazing. And it was like, what if we got out of that business, out of the business of no matter how great your cattle looks, you get this price, to where actually, what if we set the price based on the value that we can provide, or that at least we feel like we can provide? What if we do that? It's like, well, okay, you start looking into it and you realize, okay, the margins are terrible. You're going to have to probably be pretty expensive if you do it this way. But like, yeah, it could work. And so we launched that business, almost 5 years ago now, and have just been growing it, because that was the thing, kind of the last story I'll tell you around like how we got here. But the last year, so literally like this week is when we're doing what you call shipping, which is when, any calves that are coming in that you are selling, they come, they haul them out. The big fall roundup and everything else that's going on is this week. And so it was literally like 8 years ago, like this week, I'm at my house here, but I was down by where our scales are, because they weigh them and then they sell them and then they write you this check. And my dad didn't know I could hear him. I know that because I don't think he would have had the conversation in front of me, but I was far enough away to where I could hear, but to where they didn't think I could hear him. And him and my stepmom were over there talking, and they hand him the check. And again, like, you get one payday a year when you're in the ranching business, right? Like maybe if you do some other stuff, you can make a little here and there, but really like you get one check a year. And my dad has the check in his hand and my stepmom's sitting there and she's like, you know, what are we going to do, Dave? Like, what are we going to do? And I could just see like this dejected look on my dad's face. And he's just like, I don't know. I don't know. We'll figure it out. And that's basically where it was. And at that point in my life, I was making like more money than I'd ever made in my entire life. And I'm looking over there at a guy who works hands down harder than anybody I ever knew. And he doesn't know how he's going to make it. And I'm like, what is wrong with this? Like, I sit in an air conditioned office and I make all this money. And my dad is out there in the wind and the snow and the rain and the 100-degree heat, just freaking busting his ass. And he can't figure out how to make enough money to even make ends meet. It's like, this just doesn't make sense to me. Like, this is bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if we can cuss, but I was like, you know, but it's like, this is just such bullshit. Like, this guy's working so hard. And yet he's over there just stressed to the limit because his one paycheck isn't even going to pay off his operating loans this year. Right? Like, not only did he not make money, but he's losing money because the cattle market came in and said, yeah, this year we're going to value cattle a little less. And so just take it, you know? And like, I was so like honestly, like I felt terrible. Right. And it wasn't something where I could go give my dad money. He would never take it. It would be like, hey, Dad, let me give you some money. And he'd be like, no, you know? So it's like, I knew that wasn't even an option. But what it did is it woke me up to the idea of so many good people are getting screwed by the current industry, the current cattle industry. And so when we went to go ahead and start our business, it was like, you know what, we may not make millions of dollars with this business, but the one thing that I won't do if I'm in the cattle business is be beholden to these people who tell me how much I can or can't make. Like, I won't do that. If the market tells me I can't charge these prices and we can't make money, okay, fine, we go out of business. But what I won't do is have some person that, you know, I'll never meet in my life, or this group of people setting these prices for one reason or the other. Like, I'll never do that. I'll never buy into that system. And so that's what eventually led to us launching Crosso Meats and doing everything we can to grow it. I mean, ideally, we'll get to the point, and we've been able to these last year or two, to where we can start, you know, getting some steers from some other local ranchers that, you know, run locally here. We know how they're raised. We know what they look like and everything else. But ideally, like, we want to expand at least to our area. I don't really know that we want to go super big on the meat side of things. We have some other plans too. But yeah, like, that's always been the plan, is like, how can we help some of these people that literally work harder than anybody you'll ever find, and yet there's absolutely no financial gain or reward for them. In fact, most of them are selling out. Most of them get to a point in their life to where they can't do it anymore. So they sell their land, which means it's going for some other reason to build another set of condos or whatever, right? And so, yeah, it's like, if we can figure this thing out, maybe we can preserve this way of life a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, you know, I found out about your meat from Ryan a couple years ago and started cooking with it, and I was like, whoa, this stuff tastes great. Can you kind of give us a rundown on how you guys, you know, I have questions about what kind of cows you raise, and then obviously, you guys have such a nice natural habitat that they're able to just graze and move around. And I know you guys, I've watched, you know, on your Instagram stories, the challenges you guys deal with on a daily basis. It's not like, oh, we just, you know, they just graze around and we go pick them up. No, like, you know, they're off in the mountains, you know, however many miles away, chasing them down, bringing them back. Give us kind of, you know, the rundown on that. And yeah, I'd like to know, like, you know, give us about the cows, and then also why you guys ended up doing, you guys do a chopped barley finish from a local producer. So, and that does give it a really nice taste. So kind of give us all that good stuff there.
Yeah. So I think so much of the quality of meat, you know, and you can look at studies, you can, like, one of the best ways I feel like there is to learn stuff is to find just smart people, or people who have been doing something for a long time, and talk to them. And so that's really what I've tried to do with this. Because when we went from kind of the cow calf operation to more of the meat operation, it is a completely different deal. And so there was just so much learning curve there. But having talked to all of these people, you know, it's like, is Angus better, or is, Herefords better or Highlanders better, or like all these different types of cattle better, right? And you'll get people that'll be like, oh yeah, it's only certified Angus, or it's only Charolais or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, everybody kind of has different opinions on that. So what's the truth of it? And really, like, where I feel like the truth of it is, if you want the best quality meat, is to, number one, see how they're raised. Because I've had great beef that is certified Angus. I've had great beef that was, Hereford. I've had great beef that is like this. There's just these people that do this crazy mix of, like, it's basically like a dairy cow, a Holstein, and then they mix it with a Wagyu breed somehow, some way. It's like, that was pretty good, right? And so it's like, what is it? The breeds and all this. In my opinion, most of that is marketing. That might be completely, like sacrilegious to some people listening to this, but I don't think that there's a massive difference. I think there is some breeds are more able to marble and stuff like that, a little easier, gain fat. But what I think so much of it comes down to is the habitat. And so with the habitat, what is that? The number one thing is water. So a lot of people are like, well, duh, of course. But even if you get into like southern Idaho and, different parts of the country, water isn't like super readily available for cattle. They might have to walk, from where the grazing area is, they might have to walk, several miles potentially. And when cattle don't have water nearby, it stresses them out. Stress causes inflammation, right? If cattle don't have good feed, stresses them out. Stress causes inflammation. So one of the reasons why I will most likely go to my grave thinking that our beef is so much better than most is because of the fact that they're raised in such a low stress environment. And so you're not having to worry about a lot of inflammation. We also are pretty steep, rugged terrain. So it keeps them from just getting fat and nasty, like some of these feeder cows do sitting out in a flat pasture in a feedlot. They actually, they're walking around, they're using muscles. And so it keeps them from, just getting fat and nasty, best way I would put it. And so I think that it all starts with that, just the low stress. But then what we do to finish them is we do bring them in for the last couple of months, and we finish them with a locally grown barley. And what we did with that is we wanted to kind of like thread this needle of, if you've ever had true grass-fed beef, like true. And I'm not talking about some of the stuff that gets certified grass-fed. Funny, I actually learned a trick on how they do that not too long ago. But if you have like certified, like truly is grass-fed, grass-finished, it's usually completely disgusting. Just because it's tougher than boot leather, has a gamey taste to it a lot of times. And so it's like, I don't want that. I know that's all the marketing rage, all of that, but great. I don't want that. I want to be able to eat what we produce. But then you go over to the corn world and some of these soys and stuff like that. And it's like, but I don't want that. All the GMO stuff, all the nasty, silage that they use and some of that type of stuff. It's like, I don't want that either. So how do we like thread this needle of keeping them away from all the crap, but yet also making it taste good and also get some of the marbling that obviously gives meat the flavor? And that's where we went with barley. And so, yeah, we use a locally grown chopped barley. We feed it to them to finish them out. And then once they are processed, we also do a dry aging on it, typically around 14 days of dry aging, just to lock in that flavor a little bit more. And what you're left with, and one of the biggest things that I get so often from our customers and people that do eat our meat, is that it tastes different. And most people are like, it's the most bold flavor I've ever had, it's a better flavor, and all of that type of stuff. And so that's really, really cool to kind of get that feedback from people, because it is different. And I think our ground beef, for whatever reason, is absolutely second to none. A lot of people aren't raving over grass, over their hamburger. It's usually more steaks and stuff. But, I eat literally our burger probably 3 to 4 nights a week in one capacity or another. And so, yeah, just, it does, like with the low stress mixed with kind of doing the barley finish, not adding in all the other crap, not doing the hormones, because there are a lot of ways that you can cut corners. Putting in growth hormones is a great one. Like, it would save us a ton of money if we injected them with growth hormones, right? Because we would be getting so much more bang for our buck with the feed. But that was another thing. Like, I've read a lot about growth hormones and the inflammation that creates and some of the stress that can create on the body, both theirs and ours. And so it's like, we'll stay away from that. Really kind of the only thing that people could look at us and be like, oh, it's not completely natural is the barley. But the funny thing is that barley, like if you were to turn a cow into a barley field, they would eat it, be just fine. Right. If you were to turn a cow into a cornfield, they would die. They wouldn't be able to eat the corn. Right. And so it's still natural to them. In fact, a lot of people use like barley hay even to feed. So it's still a very natural, a very natural feed to them. Without getting into some of that stuff that just puts so much weight on them so fast and stresses their body and creates the stress hormones and all of that. And so that's kind of how we've been able to thread the needle on what we do.
Yeah, and I can attest to the ground beef. I mean, it does have a really, really nice flavor to it. It is kind of hard to describe. I try to describe it to people sometimes or tell them. And you guys do sell out a lot. I do want to talk to you about that too. But like, because it's so good, and so it does have a nice flavor. It's super easy to eat. And you guys are selling out a lot. So what's going on there? Like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I want some more and can't get any. What's going on there?
Man, it's been crazy. We started this with, what was it, 12 steers. So roughly about, let's say 5,000 pounds of meat. And I threw it out on a Facebook post and I was like, I don't know if anybody's going to buy it. We'll see. And all of a sudden people were like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll buy it. We'll buy it. We'll buy it. And we sold out pretty fast to that. And it's like, okay. So this next year, this was kind of halfway through the year. So it's like, why don't we bump it up to, gosh, I don't remember what we did kind of the first full year. It's like 25 or something like that. And it's like, because you start thinking, like it's a lot of money, for a ranch to even do like 25. And then we sold through that. But it was like, it sold pretty good, but it didn't sell like as fast. And so we're like, and then we bumped it up again, or no, maybe we doubled. We bumped it up a little bit the first year and then we doubled and then we like basically doubled again this past year, and we just can't keep it in stock. And like, I don't really know what to necessarily attribute it to. Like, obviously we try to put stuff out there on social media with, Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. But then we also started going to a farmer's market in the town where I used to work at that really nice restaurant. That's kind of like Idaho's version of like a Lake Tahoe. It's a town called McCall. And so very transient. You get a ton of people there from everywhere. There's a big lake there. There's ski mountain. And we started doing a farmer's market there in the summer. And it was like, once people could come and like meet us, the thing just took off. And the farmers markets are an absolute pain in the ass. Like, I don't know if you've ever done them for any reason, but like you're packing all your stuff up, you're setting up. It's like every Wednesday and Saturday for like 7 months. That's what, I mean, mostly my wife does it more than I do. I'm not going to lie about that, but it's your whole day. And then it was like just people more and more, and then more people subscribing because we have our monthly subscription. And then this year it got to the point to where it's like, we like don't have any meat really to sell for probably 5 months because it's basically all pre-sold. And so we're like, okay, we really need to scale. But the problem, and this is honestly something that I'm super excited about, I haven't actually talked about it really anywhere, is so the problem that we would run into, and this is just total transparency, right? Like I'll tell what our problems are. One of our biggest problems is that like our ribeyes, our New Yorks, like our premium steaks, we cannot keep them in stock. Like they just go so fast. Our burger sells like crazy. Can't hardly keep it in stock half the time. But we also have like all of the other stuff that, I grew up eating because obviously you eat everything. But it's like all of the roasts, all of the round steaks, all of the, some of the, I would say like secondary cuts of meat, people just don't really buy. Even some of the briskets and stuff like that, which is like, I love a good brisket. A bunch of this stuff, people just don't really buy. They maybe they don't know how to cook them, or they don't know, the best way to make a really good, brisket or whatever. And it was like, it kind of surprised me that it's like, this stuff all sells out. Our ground beef sells out, but like we have all of these things kind of in the middle that don't. And so we made like probably the biggest bet of our business so far into what we'll be launching within the next probably week to 2 weeks is a shelf stable beef stick. And the idea on that is to get on store shelves, but really also to utilize all the stuff that just doesn't sell as good for us and put that into like a shelf stable beef stick. And so what a nightmare, Dave, that is. If anybody out there is aspiring to get into like the shelf stable beef stick world, good luck. It's basically taken us like 2 years to figure this thing out. Because you have to find somebody to do it, the recipes, you have to trademark stuff, like absolute nightmare. But the biggest thing is just finding somebody who will actually do them for you. You can find a ton of people who will take somebody else's meat and slap your label on it, right? Or find some imported beef and, you know, change the recipe a little and call it yours. You can do that pretty easy. But if you actually want to take your meat and have it done, it is insanely hard to do. And so we finally got it locked down, found a processor who could do it. And we've basically taken tens of thousands of dollars worth of our inventory now and put it into beef sticks that we'll be launching. And so we're just kind of sitting here, fingers crossed that they sell.
Oh, I think they will. And I just got that email about that. That's why I wanted to ask you about it. And you had that one word that you want to talk about, which is grit. And that's, you know, that takes grit for you to take on that project and be patient with it for 2 years, knowing that it's going to take time, you know. And I think that's a testament to your mindset and being resilient with the ranch. And, you know, that gives you, you know, you guys get a lot of credit, and you've got the whole family involved, which is cool too. You know, you know, your wife and and you got 4 kids. So like it's awesome that you guys are all doing it together. And then what's that, you know, that process? I know, like, I've talked to other people that've had sauces, you know, and they take, you know, one guy took 6 years before he actually put it out, you know, and it was like testing. One was like, oh yeah, everyone thinks it's great. That's one thing. You test it out, you give it to family or friends, or you go to the farmer's market and test it out. But to actually package it shelf stable, like you're talking about, is a whole different thing, especially when it's your sauce and you don't want anyone else to make it and you want it a certain way, you know. So I'm excited about that because I know you do have the jalapeno beef sticks, right?
Yeah, so we have those that our current processor, it's just basically their recipe, but they aren't shelf stable. They technically they have to be refrigerated because of the moisture content. And we really like those, but they have you know, some nitrates in them and some stuff like that that we don't love, but it is what it is with them. And so we had to go outside to find somebody who could actually make, number one, a shelf stable one, which for maybe people who don't know that, all comes down to moisture content and obviously the preservatives that you put in that to make it stable. For ours will be up to a year basically that they can be eaten for. And then the second side of it was to get them done without all of the stuff that I wouldn't want my kids eating. Basically, is kind of like the test we put it through. And so when we did that, it's like, you know, because so many of them, you can get the cheaper ones that have, you know, the preservatives are a bunch of nasty stuff that you probably don't want. And so that was the big thing, is we want them to taste good. We don't want them to be chock full, loaded full of sugar. You know, because it's like, for me, I've spent the better part of the past couple of years on like it's crazy, but like doing a carnivore diet, right? And so if you're not wanting to eat sugar because you're on maybe a strict diet, maybe you're keto, whatever, it's actually really hard to find beef sticks that don't have sugar in them, but also taste decent. And some of the times it's like, I don't even know why you need sugar in a jalapeno stick, right? Like, it's a jalapeno stick. It doesn't have to be super sweet, but yet maybe you turn it around and it's got, you know, 10 grams of sugar or whatever it is. And so we were trying to, like, again, kind of like with the meat, straddle the line of like trying to find something that tastes good, but yet is super clean, doesn't have all the MSG, the nitrates, all that type of stuff. And then also somewhat healthy, right? Like our teriyaki will have a couple grams of sugar in it, because that was like the one to where it's like, hey, if you want something sweet, good, we got you. But like our original, our jalapeno, they'll have 0 grams of sugar in it. So if you want to go that direction, those are the ones I'll probably be eating the most of. But yeah, it's a wild process trying to do that. And you had kind of brought up the word grit because, and it's weird how the world works, right? Like we hire this trademark attorney and we have the name of our sticks at that point was going to be, I think we were going to call them Savage Sticks. Cause like the whole idea that went into it, our local high school, like where our kids go to school and everything, they're the Salmon River Savages. So we're like, kind of the ode to home. Like we're going to call it a Savage Stick. We're the home of the Salmon River Savages. And our attorney was like, yeah, you'll get sued by whoever Macho Man Savage did Slim Jim or whatever, right? Oh, and it's like, yeah, you'll probably get sued by Slim Jim. And it was like, okay, well, let's not do that. And then we came up with like all these different names. And Jess and I, my wife, we're like sitting there like racking our brain. We put it out to our email list and it was like, anything, just somebody give us an idea. But it was like we just couldn't find it, and we're like, there's got to be something like what is it that like encapsulates toughness and resilience, and like encapsulates kind of like what we like to feel like we've had to go through, and what required us to get through all this crap, like because when we moved back, the house was falling down, like a whole other story, right? And it was a nightmare for like the first 2 years we were back here. But we're like, what's something that like encapsulates all of that? And it was like, I wish there was a better word for like grit. Like what's a better word? We can't call them like resilient sticks. We can't call them tough sticks. People don't want a tough stick. And we're like, what if we just call it a grit stick? And then it was like, okay, yeah, actually let's do that. And so, yeah. And then kind of like, again, just like full transparency, like our whole marketing pitch around a grit stick is going to be around like acknowledging, and I don't want to say necessarily even like, making it super polarizing, but people like my dad, that every day just got up and just freaking gritted his way through life. You know what I mean? Like out on his horse, out there doing this stuff. I mean, he's doing what like takes most of us, like 6 or 7 of us, like he was doing that on his own. And it's like the best word to describe him and like how he lived was just freaking grit, just gritting through it. And, like these people who go out there and they're, working these jobs that maybe they suck, but they're trying to take care of their family. And it's like the one word that could describe like those people is like just grit, just that toughness. And so it's like, okay, there's nobody in the beef stick world that really is like talking to these people, right? I feel like so many of these people, the police officers, the firefighters, like, yeah, we're like, thank you for your service, but there's no one really like spotlighting these people, it feels like, or some of these blue collar jobs that now seem to be looked down on, because everybody wants to be some YouTube star or whatever, right? It's like there's still a lot of awesome people that are out there doing the shit that needs to be done in order for our country to be great. The people that are building roads, the people that are, the nurses, the teachers. I mean, you don't think it takes grit to be a teacher some days? I mean, I can imagine dealing with the shit those people have to deal with, right? And so it's like there's just so many awesome, and it's in the political season and Trump talking about making America great again. So it's like, what does make America great? Well, it's like all these people that are out there just freaking gritting their way through whatever it is that they're doing. It could be a stay-at-home mom. Like, you want to see somebody who's got grit? Like, look at my wife when she quit her corporate job to stay home with 4 young kids. Like, that's some grit, right? And so, it's like, how do we encapsulate all of that and kind of make it a rallying cry to spotlight these people, and not just kind of like I did put in the email, not just a beef stick, but also kind of like a rallying cry. And there's some really cool stuff that we want to do to like give back and things like that we'll talk about a little later, after we launch and whatnot. But, it's like, how do we just kind of encapsulate all of those just, even like MMA fighters, right? Like those are some of the grittiest, toughest people. They're freaking getting choked out and they won't tap, right? Because they just got too much grit. They're not going to allow themselves to freaking tap out. And it's like, there's so many of these people that just have so much grit to them. And it's like, how can we call them out? How can we spotlight them? How can we celebrate what they're doing? Because we kind of live in a world now that tells you like to be lazy and go along to get along, whatever. And it's like, no, there's actually a lot of badasses out there that are freaking kicking ass. And those are the people that we want to associate with.
Yeah. And that's awesome. I mean, being a former first responder, it's like, we don't get thank yous for the most part, at least on the police side.
Yeah.
Maybe on the fire side, but on the PD side, you don't. It's a thankless job for the most part. You do it because you love it and you want to help people. But that's an awesome project, man. I'm excited.
Yeah. I'm so excited about it. I'm obviously a little bit terrified about it because it's always one of those things where if it doesn't work, like I guess we'll figure it out. That's kind of like our mindset. But I'm hoping it does, just because we've put a big wager down on it. Let's put it that way. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm hoping it
no,
does.
and I'm sure it will. And I just want to highlight some of the other stuff you guys have. You guys do have pork. Are you guys raising the pork on the land there?
So what we've done, and that's been the problem this year, is so we got asked for pork over and over and over and over again. Especially at like farmers markets and stuff. It was always like, okay, I already use you guys for beef, but like, where do I get my pork from? It's like, I don't really know anybody that does it. And so we're like, let's get into this pork thing, but we've never had the desire to actually do the breeding and stuff, obviously, like we do with the cattle. So we found some people in northern Idaho that are like pig people, like pig people. That's what they do. They're all about pigs. And we tried out actually a bunch of different pork, and they just blew everybody out of the water. The pork was insanely good. Just like all of it was great. And so we're like, okay, we'll buy them as piglets. We'll feed them out the way we want to, which is very similar to the way that we feed out our beef, which is using barley, and then we add in some locally grown peas. And so it's like we'll raise them, we'll feed them how we want to, make sure they're super clean. But then this past year, they had an issue with their whole breeding program and basically didn't have any pigs. So we're like, okay, we'll make a pivot. We'll get piglets from somebody else. And we're like, before we do it, though, we want to try them. And honestly, like we haven't been able to find anybody that's nearly as good. So we're basically at this point almost completely out of pork. I'm hoping that we can get it figured out with those people to get the piglets again, so we can keep doing pork. But yeah, it like we've kind of built our brand, I feel like, around trying to be the best of the best. And when we tried some of the other pork, we're like, it's okay, but it's not great. It dry, not as buttery flavored, I guess, almost. And
Yeah,
so
the bar has been set, right?
yeah, it's like we can't go backwards now. Maybe if we would have started there and just continued on with just kind of your run of the mill, whatever breed. But these people, they've been breeding pigs for like 35 years, and it's like a cross between like Heritage and Mangalitsa and like all these different really crazy breeds that they've like basically bred to be just insanely good pork. And it was like, I'd rather be out of pork than sell stuff that's subpar. So yeah, unfortunately, we're on hold right now with the pork.
Fair enough. And then, something that's kind of coming to light probably in the last few years, but it's not anything new. It's just people decided to get away from seed oils and everything else. Is you guys have tallow now, and you guys also have the salves and soaps, right? So tallow has become, with all the health guys out there and all the guys putting it out, and it's such a super good thing to use to cook with. And you guys are providing that now too, right?
Yeah. So again, another thing that you're always looking at is what are we maybe wasting? What are kind of the byproducts of being a meat business? Well, one of those big things is fat. And, you know, kind of again, like going down a little bit of a health journey myself and losing a fair amount of weight a couple of years ago, I started getting into like seed oils and how they're basically in everything. And it was like, okay, what's the alternative to seed oils? Tallow. Okay, I've heard a little bit about tallow here and there, but like don't really know anything about it. And then we started looking into it, and it's like, oh, we actually basically throw away all this tallow every time, we process beef. And so we got into that. And then we started looking into like the soaps and the salves and all of that, for people that don't know what a salve was, which I didn't know about like 2 years ago, which is basically just lotion. Um, it's like, actually that stuff is really, really good for your skin. And it has like a natural bonding effect with your skin, which a lot of like store-bought lotions are more of a moisture barrier. And, there's some science behind it. People can look it up if they care to, but it's just like, okay, what if we did like some soaps? And we tried some people, and the first bar that I tried from this lady that made it, felt like I was showering in roast beef. And it's like, that's not the trick there. Nope, can't do that. And then we actually, crazy enough, our neighbor makes some of the best like tallow and goat's milk stuff. And so it was like, okay, we could learn how to do this. or like, again, try to keep our economy local. We approached her and she was like, sure, I can do it. And we worked with her on some of the formulas and kind of what we wanted it to smell like. And she did it. And I was just like, I used the soap for the first time and it's just, there's no way this is beef fat because that sounds disgusting. But I used it and I was just sitting there thinking like, oh my gosh, this is really good soap. And it lathers and it doesn't smell like roast beef and it actually works really good. And so like we might have something. And then of course, the Instagram, Facebook, they hear everything you say. So I start getting targeted by all these ads for tallow. And so I'm like, this must actually be like a real way to make money for people is to sell this stuff. If they can afford to run Instagram ads, Facebook ads for tallow, there must be some money in this. And so we started doing that again, kind of introduced it mostly at the farmer's market. People could come by, try this out on their hands. And, they're always like, oh my gosh, this is insane. And then we would sell out of that. So it's like, okay, this is pretty cool that stuff that we normally weren't selling, now we can turn it in to like sellable products. And they're actually really, really good for you. And so we've been able to kind of continue down that vein of trying to be very health conscious. Try to use all of the animal is the other side of this. And so, yeah, it's actually worked really, really well doing the tallow. The soaps and salves are just crazy. Like I didn't ever think in a million years that people would buy it, just being honest. And it is insane how fast those things are flying off our shelf now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and also you got some help with some different people that are going down the health journey, like all of us are in these last years, figuring out, what's great at the store and what's not and where to get everything. So that helps out a lot. And yeah, Talus taking off like crazy.
Yeah. And it's been cool to like be a part of it in the sense of, I spent most of my 20s because I was like an athlete, but then it was, after I got done with athletics, I continued eating like an athlete, which is great while you're an athlete, but it's not so great when you're not doing athlete stuff. And so like, yeah, I spent most of my 20s and into my early 30s being fat, right? Like I know we like to sugarcoat stuff, I could say fluffy, whatever, but I spent a lot of my time being fat, in almost all my 20s and most of my 30s, I would say. And then like when COVID hit, it was just like, it was such a good wake up call to start paying attention, like what I'm eating and where what I'm eating is coming from and what I'm putting on my skin. Like, stuff that when you're younger and you're bulletproof, you don't really think about. And maybe it's just because I'm now getting older into my early 40s. I'm starting to think about that stuff. But it seems like there's been like a consciousness all moving that direction all across the country. And so we're just very grateful that hopefully we can help people along that journey if they choose to go down that path of, maybe eating a little more meat in their diet, a little more protein. If they're going to obviously use soap and use moisturizers, hey, maybe you can use the stuff that's super clean. And yeah, just kind of trying to be an outlet for those people that want to go that route a little bit more.
Yeah, that's awesome. Before we, close things out, there anything else that you guys have working on? I know the grid sticks are probably, which you're kind of announcing here almost. This will be out in a couple weeks. So, or we can talk about timing that out. And then if there's anything else you're working on, and then I kind of I've got some fun questions for you. But do you guys have anything else that you're working on right now?
No, I mean, honestly, the grit sticks has been most of our focus here recently. It's taken just way too much time and effort, but
Yeah.
yeah. And then once we launch, I'm sure it'll probably present a whole other set of problems. So excited to figure out how to work through those too.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think what's cool about that product is like anybody can get their hands on it. Like once they do, it's like it's with everybody. It's not like, oh, I have to cook it or how do
Yeah.
I do that? No, it's like here it is.
Yeah.
You can bring it with you wherever you're going, and yeah, so that's super cool. Is
Yep.
there any, I always kind of ask everyone, but like, is there I know the meat's going to be coming back a little later, but is there a favorite dish you guys like making with your meat? Recipe or anything that comes to
I
mind
tell
all
you
the time?
what, like so I am a huge fan of tri-tip. Like it's my favorite. Next to that, because everybody always talks about ribeyes and stuff. But outside of that, I'm a huge flat iron guy. So like those are kind of my two go-tos, like with the tri-tip and the Traeger, you know, slow cook that. I love the Black Saskatchewan rub from Traeger.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, honestly, just keep it super simple. If you got good meat, some good rub, cook it right. Like I'll sit there and eat a 2-pound tri-tip by myself if I'm not careful. I gotta really watch for that. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, fancy stuff. I don't. I'm not a great fancy. I'm so like plain when it comes to some of this stuff. It's like, you know, with a lot of the steaks, just throw some salt on it and just yeah.
Yeah.
You're the guy to ask about that.
I just try to have fun with it too, you know, like try to do
Yeah.
different flavors and stuff. It's like, oh, you know, what do I play with? You know, I got some beef from Colorado Craft Beef. I got one of their beef boxes lately, and like I was like, oh, there's top sirloin in there. I was like, what do I do with that? And even some other guys were asking me about it. I was like, oh, I'll just, you know what, I'll let it thaw like halfway where it's still a little bit frozen, and then I can slice it. So then I just sliced it thin, and then I did like stir fry like Mongolian beef with that.
Nice.
You know, that's a fun way to play with it instead of cooking it like a steak or, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always trying to find fun ways to do it, especially with your guys' stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I play with like all the different recipes. Tacos is probably my favorite with the ground beef for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially when I'll make the tortilla too, and then I'll make pickled onions and we'll make sauce, and yeah, it's ridiculous. So
I started
awesome.
using mustard as a binder. That's good. Have you ever done that? I'm sure you probably have, but
I have. It's a common barbecue like pro tip is those guys use it. And it's like they're like I mean it's like I think it's like 50-50. Some guys like it, some guys don't bother. They're like, oh, it'll still stick. But yeah, they're trying to just get it to keep the seasoning on the meat while they're smoking it.
It gives just like a little bit of almost like that tangy flavor, which is funny because my kids all hate mustard. Like none of my kids like mustard, but I did a tri-tip with mustard as the binder, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that is so good. What'd you do different?" And I'm like, "Put mustard on it," and they're like, "Oh, gross," you know. And it's like you didn't
like,
even
no,
know it.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean that's, you know, pretty much what I've got for you. Is there anything you want to talk about? I know you have your own podcast, which is awesome, the Primal King podcast. Obviously you guys can find crossomeats.com with all your stuff, at crossomeats on Instagram, and Derek is Primal King. Anything else? And then I'll leave the floor with you. Is there any advice you want to give? The floor is yours, man.
yeah. I mean, yeah, we've just had like the kind of the craziest journey over the past few years, and so like the only piece of advice that really I try to give people is just like don't quit, because there has been so many times over the past 7 years since we moved back to the ranch to where it's like, you know what? It would be so much easier just to sell this place, go get a little subdivision house, you know, like just make life easier. But in almost every situation I've ever been a part of, easier is almost never better. Like an easier life does not equate to a better life. In fact, I think an easier life typically makes for a harder life. And, you know, I know a lot of people have been going through a lot of stuff these past couple of years, and whether the economy or pricing or whatever. But yeah, I always just try to tell people, man, just don't quit. I know it's super cliche. Understand it. But at the same time, there's been opportunities come about in our business, not because we're great at what we do, not because, you know, we've tried really hard. It's just been literally because we haven't quit. And I think too many people start off trying to do things thinking that they'll happen really, really fast, and they almost never do. And it's just that, again, coming back to the word, right? It's just that grit and that persistence that, you know, it might be 3 years from now, you meet that one person that introduces you to a network, or might be 5 years from now, you know, like you hear stories of people taking 10 years of scraping by before they get their overnight success. And that really has been my experience with so much so many different things in life, is that if you can just not quit, sooner or later, I don't know if it's karma, I believe it's God, I mean, whatever, universe, like I do believe that you are rewarded for that over time. And it may not seem like it if you're in one of those valleys right now, but if you just go long enough, typically, and you work hard enough, typically, I think it's going to be all right. So that would really be my only wisdom.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. We'll leave it at that, and appreciate you coming on. And it's awesome to finally sit down and talk with you.
Likewise.
Take
Thanks
care,
for having me
everybody.
on.
Thanks for listening.